Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Fundraising Today and the Go Beyond Fundraising podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be exploring the latest innovations in the digital marketing and fundraising landscape, specifically focusing on how your nonprofit can utilize Google Analytics 4 to enhance your online presence and optimize the acquisition of names at the top of your marketing funnel. Joining me is Emil Isaakov, one of our rockstar data analysts at Allegiance Group and Pursuant. And Emil, you're going to walk us through all of the changes implemented with GA4 and how nonprofits can optimize their websites for their goals. Emil, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to helping nonprofits modernize and adapt to some of the changing landscape when it comes to marketing and data analytics.
I know this is going to be a really rich discussion, and you've prepared some awesome notes for us. A lot of nonprofit organizations that we work with here at Allegiance Group and Pursuant come to us for help with their websites. And making sure that your website is set up to accurately capture all of the activity that's happening and make sure that it's actively tracking and measuring against whatever goals you have is really important. And it's an important conversation to have right now as we're looking at our strategic plans for 2024. So for those who are tuning in, and Google Analytics 4 is maybe a term they've just seen floating around on the internet and they're not really sure what it all entails. What is Google Analytics 4 or GA4, and how is it different from the previous version of Google Analytics?
Yeah, so Google Analytics 4 is the newest version of Google Analytics. The former version was called Universal Analytics or GA3, depending on where you see it. But it is the Google's attempt at modernizing and thinking long-term as far as data collection, storage, all that kind of stuff. So it was the old version of Google Analytics. I'll just call it UA or GA3 throughout this podcast. It was around for, I don't know, 10 plus years. Everyone relied on it. It was a very powerful tool. And there's still some things in GA4 that aren't quite up to that standard yet. But Google, the idea with it, with the new version GA4, is that they wanted to make sure that they were ready to handle all of this data. Most websites that I've worked with in my, I don't know, the last decade have used Google Analytics as their data analyst platform. So you can imagine when most of the web uses this to store data, they want to think about it that way. And this is actually one of the powerful things that comes with it. So let's just start from the beginning, the differences between Universal Analytics and Google Analytics 4. Universal Analytics, anyone who's familiar with it was very session-based. Any kind of tracking or data analysis you do is done on a session level. So let's say a user comes up onto your website from an organic search on Google or Bing or what have you. That session is what's recorded, and that's the focus of all of the data there. Whereas Google Analytics 4 is more on the event-based tracking approach. And what that means is an event is any kind of action that a user performs on a website, whether that be clicking on a button, submitting a form, downloading a file. All of those are events, and they can be tracked. Some of them are already tracked. They can be tracked with GA4. So it's a very powerful and flexible data tracking approach, and it's scalable for millions and millions of events. That's the idea with it. With the free version, you have the ability to track up to 1 million events a day. So for almost all websites, it is a powerful tool. Right now, it's slowly being built out, has a lot of powerful tools right now, but it's going to get better. So I think that's one of the first main differences between GA4 and GA3. I'll just call it. It's a little easier to say it that way. The next thing I think that is really different about the two is with Universal Analytics, and this is one of the things that people don't quite like about the GA4, there's a lot of pre-built reports that you have on the left side bar. You have things to track audience level data, behavior level statistics, acquisition. You just have a lot of reports that are already built in there. And for the most part, I would say when I would use Universal Analytics, I would use maybe like 20 to 30% of the reports. So there were some really good ones there, but there were some that I rarely used. I might dip my toes in there here and there. but they were still useful. They were all pre-built. And with GA4, we don't quite have all of those pre-built, but what you can do is you can customize your own reports within the interface. So you can, whenever you log into GA4, you can see, oh, okay, I have my website domain report here. I have my campaign report here. You can pre-build these reports, and it's very useful if you just put in the extra time initially to set up those reports. There's also a thing called explorations, which is, I think, the strongest portion of the Analytics 4, and that's their custom reports interface. In the past, had a custom report interface, and it was limited. You had some things that you could create in there, but it was just not quite as powerful. You can't do things like you can do in GA4, where you can look at, let's say, cohort analysis on a more granular level for event-based actions. If you wanted to see, let's say, people from specific states in the US that came from specific campaigns that performed specific actions, that granularity, it was very difficult to create custom reports in Universal Analytics for that. But now you can do that in GA4. So I think that's one of the really powerful tools you have available to you at GA4. Another thing that I would say is kind of useful in GA4 is that out of the box, without any extra customizations needed, you have some built-in tracking that is included. So that includes things like file downloads, video interactions, specifically with YouTube, site search, about link clicks from the website. So if you have, let's say, a lot of about links to other web, you can track when someone clicks on those links, what the link URL is. Oftentimes we'll add a little bit more tracking around that, where you can tell what was the text that was clicked on, things like that. And then the last thing I would say is form interaction. So when someone starts a form, submits a form, typically I would double check that specific data point because sometimes it's inconsistent. So you might need to clean that up. But that's another thing that it comes with GA4. You have a lot of out of the box tracking that you don't need to set up. So like that YouTube tracking, you don't need to do anything else for that. It just comes included. The next thing is AI features in the free version of GA4. So in the past, Google Analytics 360 customers, which were the paid customers that it usually had a steep cost. I think it was something like 100K plus per a year. They had some of these AI features, but now a lot of that is coming to GA4. So the types of things I'm referring to are anomaly detection. So let's say over the course of a few months, let's say a quarter, there was a steep drop in sessions, and it's out of the norm, whether it be because it's not a weekend and you saw a steep drop or things along those lines. It kind of flags that to you for you. So you can, I think, set up alerts for that anomaly detection. And if there's something out of the ordinary, maybe tracking was for some reason dropped, or you're no longer being indexed by Google search, things like that, this anomaly detection is very useful. Another thing on top of that is predictive metrics. And now this is something that requires quite a bit of volume of traffic, purchases, or in some cases, I just refer to donations because a lot of our nonprofits are fundraising clients. You need a lot of those in a short amount of time. I think it's something like 28 days, so around 4 weeks of data, and consistent quality of that data. If you're able to fulfill specific requirements, you have things that are called predictive metrics. And what these are, let's say you're trying to predict what the amount of traffic you'll get or the amount of purchases or donations you'll get in the future. Predictive metrics will help you predict the number of donations and then the predicted revenue of that purchase and donation metric. So that can be very powerful, but it does require some extra work to implement and make sure that you're technically eligible to use that feature. And then the final thing that I think is different between GA4 and Universal Analytics is that Universal Analytics, you could retain your data down to a very granular level, like individual actions and events for 10 plus years, however long you had tracking enabled. But one thing and this is about Google, it's all about Google trying to think about for the future and not wanting to store the data of the whole web on their databases forever. Instead, they have a 14-month retention window. And this is something that it can be frustrating, but don't worry, it's not all your data. So the way I would describe it is you have all of your aggregate level data. So let's say your campaign level data going back to, 10 plus years. That isn't an issue. It's more when once you get down to the event level data where you want to know the exact number of the, let's say, webinar file downloads that you had from a few years ago. That kind of data you can't currently store past the 14-month window. There are solutions to that, and we'll talk about it later, but that is one thing I did want to flag about GA4.
Yeah, thank you so much for that comprehensive overview of what some of the top changes between GA3 and GA4 are. And I think what I find interesting as I'm trying to sum up some of these things and a nice succinct idea is that GA4 basically looks at your website as a place for marketing conversions to happen. And it wants to specifically focus on those things because it recognizes the function that a modern website performs rather than the old way of doing things where Google Analytics really wanted to focus on kind of the total journey someone had on a website, because it's starting to recognize that companies and organizations are most concerned with actions that someone takes on your website versus just their browsing behavior. Do I have that right?
Yeah, to a certain extent. The way I would describe it is that with Universal Analytics, it is about that user journey within a single session, and you can track conversions. They were called goals in the past, but you couldn't get as much granular data on that type of conversion. So let me provide an example. So let's say you have a donation submitted and you have all that data in your donation platform, but also in Google Analytics. But with Google Analytics, you can add extra layers of information to that specific donation event or a purchase event. So you can add things like, what is the form name or ID? Is it a one-time or recurrent donation? And how much is the donation value? And then what is the transaction ID? So those are 5 layers of extra added information to just a single goal or conversion. So it's one of those things that, again, it's about scalability. It's about making your data much more rich. So being able to distinguish between this donation and another donation. And a lot of donation platforms have that ability already baked into like their platform. So Illuminate or Razor's Edge, a lot of these platforms already have that. But what happens with Google Analytics and the power of Google Analytics is that it allows you to better track how you acquire that initial traffic. So you have that final piece in your donation platform, but what GA4 brings is that kind of extra layer of information of where did someone come from? How long did they stay on the website? What pages did they navigate towards? And all of those are stored in event level data. By using all of that data, you can provide a user journey, but you can also get more granular data or layers of data for each action. So I would say that's probably the biggest difference. You have more layers of information you can add to each action.
What do these changes mean for the average nonprofit who is trying to optimize their website for things like lead acquisition, thinking like getting more names on mailing lists, or just getting some additional information about folks that are visiting their website that they hope to become donors?
The way I would answer that is that with this event-based model that comes with GA4 is you can better track actions leading up to the lead acquisition. So with 3 or Universal Analytics, the old version, you could easily track that final step and you could set up a funnel, but you can't surface that data as well. So let's say, for example, a donation form or a lead acquisition form that you wanted to track. Typically what we want to do is at least add another step before that you can track to see if, let's say, I landed on the form or on the page with the form and I viewed it, maybe clicked on it. I could track each of those, the view, the click, and to see how far along in the process did a person get before they fell off. And if, for example, you start drop off after a specific step in the funnel, you can see, oh, okay, maybe there is friction there that it's just a little bit cumbersome. Maybe they didn't see the next step of the form. There's a lot of things you can get from this event-based kind of model where you normally couldn't. You could create a funnel, but it wasn't very easy to surface that information and act on it and make decisions. For example, the classic example that I use is in the past, I had a client that had a multi-step form, 8 steps. And we noticed that most people would get 8% through the form. And then towards the end, they didn't complete the action. We're like, okay, why is that? So we went through the actual form process to see what is going on. And we noticed that that last step or last 2 steps were below the fold for the form. So they would get to that 8th step or whatever it was, and they wouldn't actually see the next step. So they thought they were done. But if they went further down, they could have downloaded something, maybe signed up for a newsletter, but they never saw that. So that's like the power of for and how it can be used to optimize pages, to optimize campaigns. It's just really powerful in really understanding how each of your users are interacting with your website. And that's mainly what I've been trying to help our clients do: understand how are users using it? How can we improve the user experience of the user? How can we improve conversion rate? Just all that stuff can be done with GA4. And it's because it's so flexible and customizable. It requires a little bit of work to do to get all that extra added features. But once you do, you can do a lot more with the data you have.
So I think just a final question for us to wrap up today. If a nonprofit is listening and they perhaps haven't been able, actually, let me rethink this, but so with nonprofits, so I'm trying to think of basically what I'm trying to get at is we know that the cutoff date for moving over to GA4 was last summer of 2023, and that any data that a nonprofit has is essentially stopped, is not being tracked anymore in Google Analytics. So if a nonprofit needs assistance with getting everything up to date and up to speed with GA4, what's a quick recommendation that you could make for them?
I would say if you feel comfortable with Google Tag Manager and you have a Google Tag Manager account, go in there, set up a Google Tag, actually first go into Universal Analytics. And it probably has already been created, let's say a GA4 property, because this is what Google did after the cutoff. They automatically created the property. But the issue is a lot of these properties don't have data flowing to them. It was created, but it was never flowing. So what you go and do is go into that GA4 property that was created, or if it wasn't created, go into the admin section and create it. And then once you do that, there should be within the admin section, there's a data streams kind of selection. You click on that, there's a specific ID that you need in there. Ultimately, that's what we need. And that ID corresponds to something like basically an identifier by which Google Tag Manager can send data from your website to Google Analytics. Once you create that tag in Google Tag Manager, the Google tag it's called, and enter that ID in there, make sure you're sending page view data. It starts sending all that data along with file downloads, video interactions, all that form submit stuff. It's a pretty quick process. And if you just want to start from just the basics, I would just set up a Google Tag Manager account if you don't have one. If you do, add a Google Tag with that ID and send data to that GA4 property. Check back the next day to see your data's flowing, things like that. And you should be good to go, at least from a starting.
Emil, I've certainly learned buckets today. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing some of your expertise with our audience. And if anybody is listening or watching today and this all sounds overwhelming and you would like for an expert to come in and help you out, Emil at Allegiance Group and Pursuant and some of our other experts would be more than happy to give you a little boost there and step in and take things off your hands.
Yeah, it was fun. One of my goals when I joined Allegiance was helping nonprofits modernize and adapt to the digital landscape. I know from working with nonprofits in the past and in my other roles that it can be a little intimidating at first, but I think it's vital that we all adapt to the digital landscape just because there's a lot of powerful tools here that you can make use of with at least the very bare minimum kind of investment. But if you want to really tackle it from a data-driven approach, let us know. We're always willing to help. We want to help nonprofits achieve their goals.
Thanks so much, Emil. Have a great rest of your day.